He had everything money could buy, except peace. She had almost nothing, but held on to a dream that got her out of bed every single day. John was a billionaire, trapped in a hollow routine. Sarah was a hardworking receptionist, keeping hope alive with every penny she saved. An unlikely meeting between two completely different worlds seemed like just another coincidence. But one simple gesture, $5 and a sandwich, started a journey of resilience, hard work, faith, persistence, and unexpected victories. What seemed like an unusual love story quickly turned into a viral scandal. And when the truth finally came out, everything fell apart. But what happened next, no one saw coming. John didn't look like anyone important that muggy afternoon in Palm Beach. With stubble on his face, wrinkled clothes, and a torn backpack slung over one shoulder, he looked more like a drifter trying to avoid hotel security. But when he walked through the revolving doors of the Grand Horizon, one of the most luxurious hotels in the city, which, ironically, he owned, he wasn't looking for trouble or distraction. He was looking for himself. After years surrounded by people who only saw numbers, not emotions, he wanted to see the world from the other side, the side of invisibility. If no one knows who I am, will anyone still see me? He whispered, stepping onto the red carpet, hiding the weight of that thought. At the front desk, Sarah was typing with quiet focus. Her eyes were sharp, her messy bun half undone, and her worn-out shoes clashed with the polished marble floor. She wasn't there out of passion. She was there to survive. Every guest she checked in was one more brick in the foundation of her dream. To open a small restaurant, using recipes passed down from her mother, a soulful cook who seasoned her beans with faith. What Sarah didn't know was that the man leaning against the wall, scanning the lobby like someone entering a cathedral, wasn't just another guest. He was John Hargrave, heir to one of the biggest hotel chains in the country. But in that moment, he was just a stranger with road-worn clothes and eyes full of unspoken stories. She noticed him the way you sense a shift in the air. Something about the way he walked, slow but grounded, triggered a quiet alarm inside her. It wasn't fear, it was compassion. Or maybe instinct, born from having been judged by appearances more times than she cared to remember. "Excuse me, sir. Are you okay?" she asked, stepping out from behind the desk, breaking protocol in the name of basic decency. He paused before answering. His eyes, though tired, still had a spark. "I'm looking for a place to stay." Sarah frowned, glancing discreetly around. Well-dressed guests, judgmental glances. She knew exactly how this would go if he took another step. "There's a nice little inn about 6 blocks from here," she whispered, switching to the soft, calm voice she used with anxious guests. "You can rest, take a shower, maybe grab a bite to eat." As she spoke, she reached in her purse and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, the money she'd set aside for lunch. She offered it to him with a mix of embarrassment and courage. "It's all I've got, but it might help." John didn't say a word. No one had done something like that for him in the last 10 years. Most people only offered him dinner when they already knew who he was. But she didn't know, and still she gave. Not out of obligation, out of empathy, and that completely disarmed him. "Thank you," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. And in that instant, he made a decision. He would stay. As a guest. As a nobody. Sarah hesitated, not out of fear, but because she felt something she couldn't quite name. Yes, the man looked like a drifter, but there was something noble in his gestures, and a pain hiding behind that faint, weary smile. "I can only authorize a room if you have a valid ID or a credit card," she said gently. John nodded and handed both over. A sleek black card and an ID that, intentionally, left out the last name Hargrave. As she ran the card through the machine, Sarah held her breath. It went through instantly. Approved. She bit her lower lip, puzzled. "Sir, is this card really yours?" John smiled, slightly more at ease. "I won the lottery." And somehow she believed him. It seemed possible. Just a lucky stranger. She walked him to the desk, trying to make sense of the contrast between his ragged backpack and the calm, confident way he looked around the lobby. He didn't seem lost. He seemed like someone who chose to be there, and that intrigued her. "Which room would you like?" she asked, still unsure if this was some elaborate prank. "The best one you've got," John replied. locking eyes with her. Sarah raised an eyebrow. The presidential suite is pretty expensive. That's fine, he said calmly. The sound of her pressing enter echoed across the lobby. Just like that, she began the booking that would change her life. What she didn't know was that she wasn't just handing over a key to her room. She was unlocking the door to a whole new story. John made his way silently to the top floor. Behind him, Sarah watched every step, not out of suspicion but instinct. Something about him felt deeper. Her heart whispered that there was more to him than met the eye. She remembered her mother's words. Some guests don't come looking for comfort. They come looking for shelter for the soul. And that's exactly what she felt. That this man didn't need soft pillows. He needed a place to breathe. Sarah sighed and returned to the front desk, brushing off the judgmental stares of a couple whispering nearby. Maybe he's just lost, she whispered to herself. But inside the elevator, John smiled quietly. For the first time in years, someone had seen him as a person. And that was rarer than any luxury sweet money could buy. That night, Sarah left work feeling both curious and concerned. She couldn't stop thinking about the man with the scruffy beard and tired eyes. About the way he said, "Thank you," like those $5 had been a life-changing gift. And the fact that he chose to stay. So many better-dressed guests had acted rudely or entitled. But this man, there was something about him. At home, she heated up some pasta with store-bought sauce and thought of the promise she made to her mother in the hospital, to one day open her own restaurant. One day, I'll serve real food with soul, she used to say. And maybe, just maybe, life was starting to teach her something, that it's never about the label. Everyone carries a story no one sees. Meanwhile, John stood on the balcony of the presidential suite, looking out over the city. The lights of Copacabana shimmered just beyond reach, familiar, yet distant. With his elbows resting on the railing and the wind playing with his messy hair, he asked himself when exactly he lost control of his own story. There he was, a stranger in his own empire. But something about Sarah, her steady gaze, her gentle voice, her quiet strength, made him want to stay. Not as a billionaire, not as the owner, but as a man. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the urge to run. And something deep inside told him that woman might just be the beginning of a change he never saw coming. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the hotel earlier than usual. Not out of duty, but out of restlessness. She'd spent the night thinking about the mysterious man in the presidential suite. Something about him unsettled her and fascinated her all at once. He was like a book with a torn cover, but golden pages inside. As she walked through the lobby, she glanced toward the elevator. And before she could stop herself, she muttered, "I wonder if he slept well." Guests at that level rarely needed attention. But John somehow seemed out of place. And that stirred something in her. Not just curiosity, but an almost maternal urge to help. John appeared around 10. He wore clean clothes, still simple, and walked like someone unsure of where he belonged. Sarah approached him naturally, wearing the kind of smile that comes from years of handling everything from difficult guests to last-minute emergencies. "Good morning, Mr. Silva. How was your night?" He smiled, surprised by her genuine kindness. "Better than I expected," he replied. And it was true. For the first time in years, he'd slept without plans, meetings, or contracts. Sarah hesitated, then handed him a folded piece of paper. "I wrote down a few tips for you, just simple things to help you feel more at ease here." It was a small gesture, but for John, it felt like something rare and sincere. The note was handwritten with neat lettering, the margins decorated with tiny flowers. "We're what makes you feel good, not what impresses. You don't have to order the most expensive dish on the menu. Use the silverware from the outside in." And finally, in bold letters, "It's not about looking rich. It's about feeling good where you are." John read it slowly, as if savoring a memory. "You wrote this for me?" Sarah blushed. "I did. I hope you're not offended." "Offended?" John smiled. "This is more valuable than any guidebook I've ever read." And in that moment, she smiled back. They didn't know it yet, but that note would become the first page of a new story. Over the next few days, they began talking more. Sarah, always helpful, started going beyond her job description. She showed John the hidden corners of the hotel, the ones guests usually didn't see. She talked about the little staff kitchen in the back, where they all ate together, and how Miss Heather, the cook, made the best rice and beans in Rio. John listened as if each sentence were an old melody he'd forgotten. And the more she spoke, the more he remembered who he used to be, or rather, who he wanted to be. "This hotel is beautiful," she said, "but sometimes the people who need comfort the most are behind the front desk, not in front of it." One afternoon, Sarah invited him to lunch in the staff cafeteria. "It's simple, but the food has heart." John accepted. They sat at a plastic table and shared rice, beans, and roasted chicken. Sarah ate with knife and fork, but without pretension, just naturally. "You know, my mom used to say good food is like a warm hug. Makes you forget life's hard stuff for a while." John chuckled. She was right. And then Sarah revealed her biggest secret. "I want to open a restaurant, you know? Something small with real food. But I'm far from making it happen. Every month is a struggle. I keep going because I promised my mom." Right before she passed, her voice cracked. And for the first time in years, John reached for someone's hand and just sat in silence. "Do you believe you'll make it?" he asked softly. Sarah took a deep breath. Faith and persistence. Sometimes that's all that keeps us standing. John had never felt so ashamed of his own wealth. This woman had almost nothing, and yet carried everything: dreams, strength, courage. And there she was, sharing her world with him, without knowing she was being watched by someone who could buy every restaurant in the city and still didn't know how to cook rice. That's when he made up his mind. He wanted to learn. Not to impress her, out of respect. "Would you teach me how to cook?" he asked. Sarah's eyes widened. "Of course I would, but why?" "Because I'm tired of living without flavor." That weekend, they went to the street market together. Sarah showed him the stalls, the spices, the secrets to chopping garlic right, and making onions less bitter. John, with the same old backpack and hair tied back with a basic elastic band, laughed like a kid. "You look like a boy discovering the world," she said. "That's exactly how I feel," he replied. When they got back, she taught him how to make baked beans. Slow and steady. Good food doesn't rush. John clumsily chopped vegetables, but with a joy he hadn't felt since the days his dad used to take him fishing. "You know," he said between laughs, "I don't think anyone's ever treated me this well." Sarah paused, looked at him, and said softly, "It's because I see you, Mr. Silva, not what you wear, but who you are." And that sentence stuck with John. More than just the words, it was how she said them, with sincerity. That woman wasn't impressed by looks, money, or promises. She just cared, and that was rarer than gold. In the following days, Sarah kept teaching him little things: how to hold a wine glass, how to pronounce fancy French menu items without sounding ridiculous, how to move confidently through a high-end space. But always without arrogance, without making him feel small. It was as if she were saying, "You belong here too. You just need to remember who you are." And with every lesson, every dish, every glance, John found himself tied to something no amount of money could buy: real affection. That evening, while Sarah explained the difference between two types of wine, something John already knew by heart, he smiled inwardly. Not because of the lesson, but because of her effort. "Sarah," he said gently, "why do you do all this for me?" She looked down at her glass. "Because I can tell you're trying. And I believe everyone deserves a second chance, even with themselves." And in that moment, John understood. It wasn't about learning etiquette. It was about being seen, felt, accepted. The billionaire who once wanted to disappear now wanted to feel whole. And maybe for the first time, he was learning how. It was supposed to be just another casual dinner, like many they'd shared that week. John, in a simple shirt and subtle smile, waited for Sarah in the hotel restaurant, watching the way the light reflected off the silverware. But something felt off. There was a nervous tension in the air that didn't match the luxurious setting. Sarah arrived on time, but her expression had changed. She looked unsettled. Over the past few days, little things had added up. The way John walked with quiet confidence through the hallways, how the waiters subtly treated him with extra respect, and most of all, the phone call where he'd accidentally said the word billions. Sarah wasn't naive. She'd learned to read between the lines. Something didn't add up. And when his full name finally slipped through on a printed reservation list, she typed it into Google, guided by a gut feeling she couldn't explain. The shock hit hard. John Hargrave, CEO of Hargrave Hospitality Group, owner of 57 luxury hotels, including the Grand Horizon. She read and reread the profile, trying to process it. The man she'd taught how to use silverware owned the building where she'd worked for the past 3 years. The one who pretended not to know the menu was the very person deciding which restaurants got funded across the entire hotel chain. The next day, Sarah showed up at the hotel without telling anyone. She was determined. She didn't know if she would scream, cry, or just fall apart, but she needed to look him in the eye. And that's exactly what she did. She found him in the lobby, casually talking to Ricardo, the manager. The conversation died the moment she approached with steady steps. "John Hargrave," she said loud and clear, every syllable sharp as a blade. The lobby, which had been buzzing with tourists and executives, fell into sudden silence. Owner of the hotel, multimillionaire, heir to $1 billion fortune. Every word hit like a public slap. And me, the receptionist who taught you how to hold a wine glass. John froze. He wanted to explain, but the flood of emotions on Sarah's face was stronger than anything he could say. "You pretended to be someone who needed help. You let me teach you, welcome you, share things I've never told anyone." Her voice cracked between anger and humiliation. Guests nearby already had their phones out, recording everything. The scene looked like it came straight out of a soap opera. Was it fun? Watching the dumb hotel girl teach you how to act fancy. John stepped forward. "It's not like that, Sarah. I don't speak," she shouted. And in that instant, time seemed to stop. But fate, always sarcastic, decided to make the scene even more absurd. At the height of the tension, as she turned to leave, Sarah slipped on the polished marble floor. Her heel gave out. Her body flew backward. And within seconds, she landed flat in the hotel's central fountain, creating a splash that could rival a Vegas show. The crowd, stunned and wide-eyed, fell silent. Then came the flashes, the stifled laughs, and the whispers. John rushed to help her, but Sarah stood up on her own, soaked, hair stuck to her face, and a water plant hanging from her shoulder. "I'm fine," she shouted before anyone could ask. "Keep the shoe," she said, noticing one of her heels floating among the lily pads. A gift from the peasants. Her sarcasm stung more than any tear. Limping out of the lobby, she left behind a stunned crowd and a devastated John. The video went viral in under 3 hours. Headlines popped up everywhere. Receptionist discovers she's been teaching etiquette to the hotel owner. Live plot twist at luxury hotel. She thought he was broke. He owned the place. Comments poured in. Some laughed, some offered support, some spun wild theories. But Sarah? She just wanted to disappear. She locked herself at home, turned off her phone, and cried until there were no tears left. The next day, Carla, her best friend, showed up with a bag of snacks and her phone in hand. "Girl, you're everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. Someone even made a remix of your fall." Sarah covered her ears. "I've become a meme." "No, you've become a symbol. Look at the comments. She's my hero. She has the guts. I never will. You don't get it. People admire you." But Sarah's pain wasn't public. It was deeply personal. She felt betrayed. Not because John was rich, but because he had lied. Because he let her open up her world while hiding his. "I loved him, Carla, and he only showed me half of who he really was." In her small apartment, surrounded by the pots she inherited from her mother and the notes from her culinary school classes, Sarah spent days trying to make sense of everything. Every moment with John now felt like a lie. The cooking lessons, the walks through the market, the honest laughter, it all seemed tainted. Was he laughing on the inside? She wondered. Did he think I was pathetic? But deep down, something hurt more than the shame, the longing. The absence of someone who, for a few weeks, had seen her as more than just a receptionist. It had felt like love. And what if that love had been real? Meanwhile, on the other side of town, John watched the fountain video over and over again. Not to laugh, but because every replay of Sarah falling felt like a stab to the heart. Seeing her pain, the disappointment in her eyes, the public humiliation. It was a punishment he couldn't turn off. "I ruined everything," he muttered, alone in his glass office. His assistant suggested he take a trip, leave the country, hide from the backlash. But John refused. She doesn't need a billionaire running away. She needs a man who stays, who faces it. And that's when he made up his mind. He wouldn't win Sarah back with promises. He'd start with the truth, the whole truth, even if it was too late. Sarah was reorganizing a shelf in the self-help section when she felt the air shift. It wasn't the air conditioning, it was a presence. When she turned around, there he was, John, in dark jeans, a plain shirt, and a look more humble than any designer outfit could fake. He didn't carry the cocky glow of the wealthy. He carried the guilt of someone who'd lost something precious. "Can I talk to you?" he asked quietly, like someone who knew he had already crossed every line. Sarah hesitated. Her body said, "Run," but her heart, it still remembered his hands in the kitchen, the way he smiled while learning to chop onions. "Depends," she said. "Are you going to lie again?" They sat in 2 armchairs at the back of the bookstore, surrounded by books about fresh starts and regrets. John didn't hold back. He told her everything, from the tragedy that took his parents to the burden of being a billionaire without peace. He spoke of the loneliness dressed up as luxury, of the people who only came close for what he could give. "When you gave me $5, his voice broke. It was the first time in 10 years someone did something for me with no strings attached. Sarah listened, eyes glossy, her expression steady. "You could have trusted me. If you told me, maybe none of this would have happened." John nodded. "I know, but I was scared of losing the only place where I felt like a normal person." She stayed quiet, taking it all in. She knew he was telling the truth, but still hurt. "You left me exposed, vulnerable, in front of the whole world." John took a deep breath and pulled an envelope from his pocket. "I didn't come just to say I'm sorry. I came to offer you a dream. Your dream." Inside was the deed to a commercial space in Ipanema, 200 square meters, industrial kitchen, permits cleared, feasibility report included. "It's not a gift. It's an investment. I want to be your business partner. You get 60%, I get 40%. You run the kitchen. I just back it." Sarah choked up. "This is a lot." "Why?" "Because you changed my life. And because your food healed parts of me that even my fortune couldn't reach." She held the envelope like it was made of glass. "And what if we don't work out? As a couple?" John gave a sad smile. "Then you'll still have your restaurant. Because even without me, you deserve it." This isn't emotional blackmail. It's respect. Sarah didn't know what to say. For the first time, someone saw value in her dream. Not as charity, but as purpose. "I need to think," she said finally. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. And if you decide you don't want me around, the restaurant is still yours." He stood up, looked at her one last time, and said, with sincerity, "Thank you for reminding me of the taste of simple things." In the days that followed, Sarah barely slept. She read and reread the letter he had left along with the deed. It was short but powerful. "You taught me that food made with love nourishes more than any fancy dish. That the true flavor of life is in the small gestures. This restaurant isn't a gift. It's an apology and an invitation. For us to create together what I could never build alone. Something with soul." The words danced through her memories. The simple lunches, the laughter at the market, the etiquette lessons, the rooftop dinner. All of it had been so real, even if built on a lie. It was only on the 4th day that she finally picked up her phone and dialed. "John." "Sarah?" His voice carried the same nervous tension as hers. "I accept." Silence. "Accept what?" "The restaurant, the partnership, and giving you a second chance. But with one condition." John held his breath. "Anything. No more lies. Not even small ones. If we're going to build something together, it has to be built on truth, no matter how much it hurts." "I promise," he said, "and I want to meet the real John. With all the pain, trauma, confusion, no CEO mask. That's the part I've been most eager to show you." In that moment, it wasn't a business deal anymore. It was a pact to start over. They met at the same place as their first real conversation, the bookstore. But this time, there were no masks. John looked different. neither homeless nor billionaire. Just himself. Sarah watched him carefully. "You hurt me, you know." "I know," he replied. "But you also saved me." She gave a soft smile. "I can forgive you, but it's going to take time to trust you again. I'll wait. And in the meantime, we're going to open the most honest restaurant this city's ever seen." She nodded. "And with only one possible name, Taste of Home." John agreed. Because anything made with love will always find a home. And there, between quiet bookshelves and whispered promises, something new began. Brick by brick, dish by dish, truth by truth. The restaurant was born long before the walls went up. It started in Sarah's heart, back when she was still selling homemade sweets in her college hallway. It started in John's eyes, the moment he realized a small kitchen could heal wounds that money never could. Taste of Home opened its doors on a sunny Saturday afternoon, filled with the smell of comfort food and Brazilian music playing in the background. No tuxedoed waiters, no French menus. Here, customers were greeted by name, and every dish came with a story. "This baked rice was my mom's favorite," Sarah would say, serving it with a smile seasoned with faith and effort. John, now a partner and the official dishwashing assistant, moved through the dining room with a sauce-stained apron, greeting customers, clearing tables, and learning, every day, that serving others was one of life's noblest acts. "I never thought washing dishes could feel so freeing," he'd say with a laugh. But he meant it. After years of closing million-dollar deals, the clatter of silverware had become his new favorite symphony. And the best part? No one there cared about his last name. He was simply John from the kitchen, and that was all he needed to be. His sense of achievement came from a different place now, from simplicity and presence. The restaurant's long, shared tables brought strangers together like one big makeshift family. It wasn't unusual to see executives sharing space with delivery drivers or elderly women teaching kids how to use a fork and knife. There was no hierarchy here, only a desire to belong. The menu changed weekly, but the philosophy never did. Real food, made with patience and soul. No processed shortcuts. Everything prepared fresh, right there, with ingredients from the same local market where Sarah and John had first learned how to choose spices together. Their faith in flavor was as strong as the persistence that had brought them this far. Reporters started showing up, curious about the growing buzz. But Sarah refused any interviews that distorted the truth. "We're not some fancy startup," she'd say. "We're just people who love what we do." When asked about the secret to their success, her answer was simple: love, effort, and honesty. And maybe some well-made beans, too. John, on his part, used his connections to keep prices fair. No one should have to choose between paying rent and eating well. And so, the restaurant grew, not just in customers, but in purpose. It became a symbol of overcoming, a space where victories were measured in smiles and empty pots. A few years later, Michelle came along. She wasn't planned, but from the moment those two pink lines appeared on the pharmacy test, she was deeply wanted. Her name wasn't chosen by accident. Michelle means who is like God. A reminder that life, even when tough, still leaves room for miracles. John rocked the baby in his awkward arms, his heart completely changed. "You're going to grow up in a home where love matters more than money," he whispered in her ear, while Sarah made oatmeal in the kitchen. They didn't know if they were ready to be parents, but they knew that together they could learn. On the small balcony above the restaurant, ordinary nights became poetry. John told stories to Michelle, while Sarah baked cakes for the Sunday community fair. With every spoonful of batter, she thought of her mother. Food made with soul is worth more than expensive food without love. That phrase, now painted on the restaurant wall, had become their guiding light. Their victories weren't just material. They were the quiet kind. Michelle's first spoonful, the customer who said, "This reminds me of my grandma," the elderly couple celebrating 50 years of marriage over clay pots and floral napkins. 5 years later, Taste of Home had 2 more locations, one in New York, another in Florida. But Sarah stood firm. "We're not turning this into a franchise. Each place needs its own soul." And John, despite his business background, agreed. A good business serves people, not the other way around. Michelle now ran between tables, handing out crayon drawings. She was the little girl born from chaos who became the living symbol of everything they'd rebuilt. In the end, it wasn't about reaching the top of the world. It was about getting closer to what truly matters, a life with purpose. One quiet night, with the city fast asleep, John stood on the balcony holding Michelle in his arms. Sarah was in the kitchen finishing sweets for a charity event. And in that moment, the baby's soft breathing, the smell of chocolate in the air, he felt a peace no stock market win had ever given him. "Your mom taught me everything that matters," he whispered. "And it all started with $5 and a sandwich." Michelle yawned. He smiled. One day, he would tell her the whole story. But for now, it was enough to live it with gratitude, faith, effort, and love. From the hallway, Sarah overheard him and stopped. She watched them quietly and thought, no matter what people say about happy endings, they do exist. They're just not made of perfection. They're made of forgiveness, persistence, and warm cheese bread at breakfast. A baby in his arms. A man who had learned to love beyond his fortune. A woman who chose to begin again, even when everyone expected her to quit. Right there, between the warmth of the stove and the comfort of that hug, was the real luxury, being loved exactly as you are. No masks, no titles, just love. And maybe, just maybe, that's what the world needs to learn most. Watch until the end and comment below. Would you forgive someone who lied, even if it was all out of love? Like this video if you believe people deserve a second chance. Subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories. Every day, a new story. Every day, a new reason to believe.